Ali Hazelwood first found literary fame after her success with her first novel, The Love Hypothesis. Since then, she has stuck mostly to her preferred genre of STEM romance, which, honestly, I didn't know was a thing, but considering she's also a neuroscientist, I'm not surprised. Earlier this year, however, she published something a little different, a paranormal romance about vampires and werewolves called Bride. It follows Misery. No, not the emotional concept, sadly, but a 25-year-old vampire who lives a dull, purposeless existence doing IT support and computer security stuff in the human world.
But not for long!
Her father insists she leave that boring life behind and enter a political marriage to forge a forced alliance between the vampires and their sword enemies, the Wares. Misery agrees. Not out of love or loyalty to her people, or because the groom-to-be Lo Morland is a certified hunk, but because she has her own mission. Her only friend in the world, Serena Paris, a human, has gone missing, and the only clue left behind is a name scribbled in her diary, L.E. Morland. Honestly, I liked this book more than I was expecting. Granted, the bar was low, but there is some competency here. Misery was alright as the main character at times. I liked her snarky attitude, usually, and her determination. She's also a computer tech whiz, which I don't see often with female characters, so that's fun. I also quite liked Owen, her twin brother, who treads the line well between clearly caring about his sister and also absolutely roasting her at every given opportunity. Anna, Lo's younger sister, is bearable, which is no mean feat for a child character. There was certainly an attempt at world building and political intrigue, regardless of success, and Hazelwood did try to make her vampires and werewolves stand out as unique to her work. Sure, she mainly did this by dropping the wolf part of werewolf and then changed the spelling of vampire and gave them pointy ears, and different colour blood. And to be fair, the green-blooded werewolves do blush green, though by that logic the ones with less melanin should always be a bit greenish, but that wouldn't be hot, so... The overall story was alright. I genuinely was quite invested in Serena's disappearance and wanted to know what happened and see her found. Possibly this is because it was really well communicated how much Serena means to Misery, so much so that for the first few chapters I was convinced this was going to have a love triangle, but I guess it's not that sort of book. Still, it's nice to have a strong friendship at the centre of the plot, to begin with anyway. And there were a couple of twists I thought were quite well done. Some are obvious as hell, but others were quite good. There's also a cat in this. No harm comes to the cat. All is well. There are still, however, some issues here. I'll start by going back to Misery's character because she definitely had her flaws. Whilst I did enjoy her snark and sarcasm in some scenes, there were times when it really wasn't appropriate. Action or plot-heavy scenes with lots of tension and information to communicate are not the place for snark, necessarily. At least snark that steals the spotlight, like this does by stopping the scene so characters can react to said snark. It's annoying and ruins the pacing and confuses the tone. This is a book that is upside down and also allows itself to be funny, but it's not a comedy. It would be like having Blackadder show up in a dramatic thriller.
What is happening here? I am being framed.
Interview terminated.
Look, I am not bent.
We've been sitting here since Christmas 1914, during which millions of men have died, and we've advanced no further than an asthmatic ant with some heavy shopping. That's the nerve there, I think.
It doesn't make sense. Misery is also weirdly passive and doesn't actually achieve that much. For all of her determination, she doesn't actually do a huge amount apart from sneak into Lo's bedroom and office to unsuccessfully look for information. As soon as the romance gets going, she does nothing of her own volition, which is a shame. It's like once she gets a man, she doesn't need to be interesting or active anymore. The only skills she has really are the hacking and the computer stuff, but she only really uses them a couple of times to little result. The only thing I remember that they do learn from a computer is found by someone else. She's also really thick. She assumes her brother doesn't like her when he clearly does. She assumes that Lo doesn't like her at first when he's clearly been at least attracted to her since they first met at the altar. But she's convinced he hates her because enemies to lovers trope, even though they never really act like enemies, so... yeah. The dad in this, spoilers I guess, the dad is cartoonishly evil, and looking back, I don't think his plans made any sense. The romance is kind of dumb. Yeah, it's still spoiled from this point on, I would say. So I'm going to blame the romance, at least partially, on the mate trope, which is like the soulmate trope if you've got wolves in your story. The idea that wares just know the person they're supposed to be with, which to me takes out the romance. You don't choose your partner or fall in love slowly or organically or genuinely. You're dictated to love by something bigger than yourself instead of it coming from within. Lo knows that Misery is his mate from the beginning, pretty much. He just knows, and so he's hardwired to be in love with her. Misery starts to fancy him when he allows himself to act how he truly feels, in love with her. So there isn't the feeling that they love each other for who the other person is, but because of the mate thing. He loves her because something that isn't him has told him to, and she falls in love with his love for her, it feels like, which is rubbish. And they draw it out for ages with this whole Lo doesn't tell Misery that she's his mate because he doesn't want her to feel like she has to stay with him for his sake, even though it's pretty hecking obvious that she digs him. Each chapter begins with this little bit in italics, which are from Lo's perspective. I appreciate that Hazelwood is trying to do something a little interesting, but it doesn't work here because it just hammers in the point even more that Lo likes her from the beginning, so makes Misery look even thicker. Without those bits, you could at least make the argument that he's in denial or hasn't worked out his feelings. It's too transparent, which takes out some of the tension, and they don't really add anything either. While there is an attempt at world building, I didn't buy a lot of it. The infrastructure of the whole human-were-vampire relations seems unlikely. These three species get on perfectly fine in other places, but here they act like territorial gangs with a private militia. How come each species knows so little about the others as well? I get they keep separate, but it's still set in the modern day. They communicate with each other, and they've been at war for, like, centuries. You'd think the higher-ups would know details about the others for the sake of staying safe and strategizing. The whole ignorance thing just doesn't seem right in this context. Especially for the vampires, if they're supposed to be the strategists. They should be getting intel, but they know nothing, or if they do know something, they neglect to tell Misery anything about wares, despite sending her to get married to the Alpha. Humans also don't know much about vampires, it seems, which is weird considering the collateral system, which has been in place for, like, at least 100 years, wherein an 8-year-old vampire of importance lives in the human world for 10 years and vice versa. So they should be experts on each other, at least. I guess it's to show that hatred is built on misconceptions and ignorance, which is all very noble and that, but it doesn't make sense here. Here, the hatred is built on the fact that they keep killing each other and wearing teeth and vials of blood as fashion accessories. Misery being such an outcast and universally hated doesn't make any sense. She was collateral when she was younger, so she spent 10 years between the ages of 8 and 18 living with the humans. I nearly get why humans might not like her, but considering the collateral system, as I said, has been in place for over 100 years at this point, they should know by now that the literal children are not going to murder them in their beds. But why other vampires don't like her, I've got no idea. They called her names as a child because she was going to live with the humans for 10 years, but I mean, she didn't have a choice, and it's painted as being like an honour and really important, and I just can't see the majority of kids ostracising someone for that. She says she didn't get much of an education in either world, but she's the daughter of the vampire prime minister or whatever. She should have learned a lot by the time she was 8, and then been welcomed back as a freaking hero at 18 to resume her learning, not treated so hideously she ran off to live in the human world. It doesn't make any sense, and it was clearly forced to make Misery lonely and feel like she's never belonged anywhere. Basically, all of the humans and vampires in this are just nasty for no other reason than to give Misery a tragic backstory. But don't worry, the Wares, who are the only nice people in this, show her true love and affection despite being the species who hate vampires the most, and help her to live again. Please, you cannot write a book about how harmful prejudice and ignorance can be, and then only have one of the 3 species with any consistently nice or good characters. Also, side note, vampires and wares are implied to be evenly matched, more or less, but they're really not. Wares are stronger and faster, and the more powerful ones can just shift into bloodthirsty wolves whenever they like. Vampires are strategists, and can do a thing called thralling, which is like brainwashing, but considering the higher up wares who are the ones with the most intel on vampires don't know this is a thing. They clearly don't use it very often. So I don't know why vampires are still alive and the West clearly would have wiped them out by now. Then so this is a bit like an old Twilight era story that someone dug out and made more adult by adding a bunch of swearing and sex scenes. I will admit I will be quite subjective here because I'm generally not a fan of sex scenes, and this book is no exception. I said that the plot overall is alright. The problem is that once the sexy scenes start, it takes a back seat. Suddenly, erotica is the dish of the day and I'm allergic. Except instead of anaphylactic shock, I get the giggles because I have the maturity of a 12-year-old boy. The danger with writing a book where erotica is the main focus and draw is that you can't account for personal taste. While many people probably found Lowe attractive with his tall, broad physique and husky voice and constant growling and size 14 shoes, I just wanted to give him a cough sweet. I'm also not into that whole alpha male, tall, muscular vibe. And as I said earlier, the chemistry between them felt forced rather than something that grew organically. So I just couldn't get into it. I also found that some of the dialogue, which I suppose was meant to be flirty or sexy or whatever, just kind of gave me the creeps because it sounded like a parent talking to their child rather than an adult to another adult. And this was made worse by the clear difference in power and authority between these two characters. And the sexy scenes themselves, I just couldn't take them seriously. I mean, I find dirty talk really funny, like more hilarious than anything. And there is no word you can use to refer to the human backside which I will not find funny. It's either clean, which is just childish, or the word ass, which I always pronounce in my head with the same inflection as Brooke Wyndham in the Legally Blonde musical.
Serious cottage cheese was showing up on my ass.
Then there's the attention to detail given to wear anatomy. At least some wear anatomy. They skim over the implication that wares don't have any internal organs, but they give a lot of thought to the nethers. This is kind of TMI. Wares have this thing that when the male of the species reaches the end, particularly with his mate, the base of his member I can't do this, swells, so that when he emits his biological barcode, it doesn't fall out the baggage area without being scanned. It's called a knot as well, so if you look at the Goodreads reviews, there's loads of like knot puns, that's why. I'm sure that Hazelwood did a lot of research into animal copulation and biological and evolutionary quirks and thought this idea was so good that it needed focus. But lady, it is not final resolution of the book worthy. The final chapter, not counting the epilogue, is not about the relationship between Misery and her brother, or Misery and Serena, or the broader relationships between the vampires, humans and wares, or the dawning of a new peaceful age, but about whether or not Misery can take a swollen werewolf dong. Spoiler, she can. Thank goodness, that's what I was really invested in. And now for some little things that annoyed me. As a vampire, Misery has no sense of smell, apart from all the times that she does have a sense of smell. What? There is an event vampires refer to as the Aster, after the colour of vampire blood, described as the day the purple of our blood and the green of the wares flowed together, which implies that it was a bloodbath on both sides, but actually it was an absolute massacre of the vampires. So why is this so important? What makes it different from any other skirmish between these two? What with the wares being so obviously the stronger group? What is with these vampire and werewolf romances having the whole love at first smell thing? Was this scene from Twilight so romantic that a whole generation of authors were like, I must use this? Oh yeah, the main character's name is Misery. Was it better than expected? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Oddly enough, yes. Kind of. To a point. Before it went downhill. Would I read it again? No. Would I read anything else by Ali Hazelwood? Hell no. From what I gathered, she essentially just writes the same story with the same characters and the same romance again and again and again, just usually without the mythical creatures. and I really don't want to read about the unique properties of a mathematician's parrot protractor.